Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bas Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. Make sure you follow the podcast on YouTube, hit that red subscribe button, tune in and tap in. Also, follow the podcast on social media, Instagram, the Social Work Rants podcast. That's all one word. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Social Work Rants and Facebook, aka Meta. Type in the Social Work Rants podcast. Hit that like button. Thank you for everybody for your love and support. If you listen to the podcast, you can listen to the podcast on all audio platforms. Specifically, if you listen to Spotify, please rate the podcast, and on Apple Podcasts as well. Please rate the podcast. I really truly appreciate it. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bass City Entertainment LLC, your home for online holistic self care using poetry and Zumba with the upcoming book, Triumph Through Pain, How to Maximize Your Full Potential During Hard Times, coming later on this summer. Be on the lookout for that. For more info, you can follow Bass City Entertainment LLC on Instagram and on TikTok for more information on the upcoming book. And also July 30th, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, to get your self care on with some virtual Zumba hosted by yours truly. All proceeds will go to Planned Parenthood of Delaware. So it has everybody know what's going on with the abortion rights. So we gotta have social workers gotta give back to our community. So it's $10 per person. Make sure you tune in, sign up, and get your dance on, get your self care on. My guest at this time is doing wonderful work for school social workers. So if you're a school social worker, this is a person you need to tap into and get your resources on. I wish I would have connected with this young lady sooner because maybe I wouldn't have retired from school social work. But I am retired from school social work in the state of Delaware. I mentioned it on past episodes. So, Jocelyn Saylor, welcome. I'm glad we could connect.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the podcast today.
Donna, I'm excited to have you on. We able to we've been following each other for a little bit on social media, but it was the monetize your how to monetize social media event that I was gracious enough to be one of the panelists that we finally connected and made this happen. So I'm glad we were able to connect. For those who don't know, let everybody know who you are, what you do, and how wonderful, exciting, yet challenging field of social work.
Sure. So, Jocelyn Saylor. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the states of Connecticut and Massachusetts. My job title is a school social work coach in my district in Connecticut, which is a very new position. We have over 100 school social workers, and then we have a director and assistant director. So it's a little bit difficult for two people to manage 100 social workers and support them, answer their questions, and so on and so forth. So the coaching position was made, which is in between the school social worker and the directors. And basically, what we do is we assist in the hiring process, the onboarding process for new school social workers, training them throughout their first 2 years, doing different professional developments with them, as well as with the district at large. We also support schools that are having a large crises. For example, this school year, we had a child that overdosed on a drug. So the school social work coaches went to the school for about a week to support with that grief and loss and the crisis management. So that is
Mm.
also a part of our role. And really just kind of guiding school social workers. We're almost like a school social work hotline. So if a school social worker comes across a situation or a case where they don't really know what to do, they would contact their coach and we would guide them through the next steps, or sometimes even go out to the school and be even more hands-on to kind of model things for them. Previous to that, I was a school social worker for the last 10 years. I also created the School Social Work Solutions Academic Resource Planner, which is a 12-month undated planner. And throughout it, it has different self-care and wellness assessments, as well as a host of resources in the back of the planner that school social workers can reference if they just need support with running groups, with understanding what medications go with different diagnoses, scheduling, all type of different resources are in the back of the planner. So that's a little bit about me.
Well, that sounds great. Having that important resource for school social workers, especially if you first started in school social work and never done it before, it's it is can be very taxing, and you may not have the support that you may need, and not getting it. Like, oh, you need to you need to know all these things, and like you just it's been it's been tough.
Yes, it's a lot to know.
Yeah, it is a lot to know. It is like constant, definitely fast paced, a lot to know. Each state unfortunately does different things, and sometimes within school districts, each school does different things,
Yeah.
and sometimes a lot of social workers are working more than one school, and it's like kind of with all these different kids with different issues and different schools doing different things, and getting to know kids and staff and
Yes.
how things run, while everything else that goes into into the schools, and not to mention just the crises that goes on. So it can be a lot.
Yes.
um how did you come up with that planner? Like, what did you see, or was something that you felt like you was missing in your work, that like you thought of this idea? Like, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I've used planners for years, and during the pandemic, when it first originally hit and we were all home, everything was shut down. I was using the Therapist Planner, which is a great planner created by Marlene Francois Madden, who is also a therapist. And I've used her planner for the last few years, and I was like, this is a great planner, but I wish I had a place where I could write all my students, like my caseload list and how many hours each student needs. And I wish I had a place where I could reference my actual like monthly schedule. I wish I had a place where I could reference medications, mental health diagnoses, how to run groups, clinical supervision hours, like all these different things I thought of like, dang, I wish I had this in there. So it was more fitting for a school social worker. So I went online, I Googled, I went on Barnes and Noble, I looked everywhere to see, is there a planner specifically for school social workers? And there was nothing out there. There was a few things I found on Teachers Pay Teachers for school counselors, but nothing specific to school social workers. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll create something like that. So
Mm.
I went in my Google Docs and I just kind of typed out all of my ideas, pretty much made a draft of it. And then it kind of just sat there for a little bit. And one day I was scrolling Instagram, and the same woman who created the Therapist Planner was like, I'm going to do a masterclass on how to create your own planner because mine has been so successful and it was really hard to figure things out. So if you want to learn how to launch your own, take my masterclass. And I'm like, wow, that was like divine timing.
Hmm.
So I signed up for her masterclass, and she pretty much went through all the steps from beginning to end of how to create your own planner or journal. Now, the steps were not easy. It was, time consuming.
Yes.
I had to invest in myself. It was a lot of work, but it was worth it because I was then able to produce this planner. And now this year is the second, well, it's the 1 year anniversary, but the second version of the planner. And it's been doing really well. So I'm just excited about it. And I'm glad that I was able to create something to help support other school social workers. Because I know for me, when I first started, I didn't have a reference guide. We didn't have coaches like the position I am now. It was just kind of like you're thrown into the school and kind of figure it out. And
Yeah.
I felt like after my first year, I was burnt out because I was doing all these different things. I wasn't for sure if certain things were in my role or if they weren't. So I was kind of people pleasing in a sense and saying yes to everything, getting super overwhelmed, then feeling like I wasn't meeting all the needs of the students on my caseload.
Mm.
So I don't want other school social workers to go through that. I want them to be able to set boundaries, create systems, and really implement self-care so that they can last in this profession, which is another driving force for me to create the planner.
And how can one go through that? Like I know like for like I did know the school social work for a year and a half, and like my first role was totally different from my second role. Like the role I just had, like I was actually in the school like all day, like every day, and it just like completely overwhelmed to a point where like I was being getting referrals and I knew it wasn't appropriate for me. It was like I'm I'm not gonna push this referral. Like if I get in trouble for it, then like I knew like where my limit was,
Mhm.
whether like okay, I'll just get in trouble, like like whatever. Like my like I purposely put like my mental health like uh,
Mhm.
ahead of the work. Like I already knew I was like overwhelmed, like or like just like overtaxed and like just done, just like waiting for like the school year to be over. Like the school year could not come like like fast enough. So like I like what can someone who's a school social worker who like say wants to continue and like okay, everybody always talk about, oh, we got the summer off and like plan like all the vacations during the summer. Like if somebody wants to like maintain in the field, what can somebody do to maintain and stay in the field?
Yep. Okay. So I would say the first thing is knowing and understanding your role. So you had stated earlier that different states sometimes have different requirements, and even from school to school, it can be very different. So I look at the National School Social Work Association of America, their standards, kind of on their website, their broad overview of what school social workers do. And when it comes down to it, it is mainly a lot of prevention and intervention school wide, right? So you want to think of the school, the whole school as your client, not just the students, because you're also going to be working with teachers, with
Hmm.
administrators, and with families. So understanding your role, and like it could be very specific depending on if you're a special education social worker, if you're working in a behavioral school, but knowing and understanding your specific role and honing in on prevention and intervention. If we focus a lot of our efforts on prevention, the intervention generally is going to go down. So when I say prevention, I'm talking about those really large tier 1 scale interventions. So let's say, for example, when I was in an elementary school, it was a large elementary school. It was actually pre-K to 8, but I only work with pre-K to 5. So some of the tier 1 classroom grade level interventions I would do would be in the auditorium, where I'm talking to the students about boundaries, how to communicate with one another appropriately, having guest speakers come in. Like I had Ronald McDonald come in and do an anti-bullying assembly, and talk about bullying and being an upstander and getting the kids involved in that. I had another speaker come in. I think he was called like Ned's Yo-Yos. So he did a whole little skit about yo-yos, but it also connected with anti-bullying once again and being an upstander and kind of taking care of your community. So doing different tier 1 prevention like that kind of sets the tone for kids to understand those basic, social skills. And then
Hmm.
your tier 2 interventions would be maybe going into the classroom and reinforcing those same things that you did at tier 1. But then your tier 3 is going to be your more individual small group work. And the way a student can get to a tier 3 could be through a referral process. So that would be the school social worker setting up a system, right? So a referral process can look like, the name of the student, their grade, and then a series of questions that you'd want the teacher to answer. So let's say the teacher is like, oh, I have this kid and he's not sitting still in class and he's interrupting other students and he's interrupting my teaching. I need to refer him for social work. So what I would do is say, okay, I'm going to need you to fill out the referral form. And in that referral form, I'm going to ask, what are the things you've done as a teacher in the classroom to prevent this? How long have you tried to do this intervention that you've created? Has it been 4 to 6 weeks? If the teacher's answering no to that, the referral's going nowhere. That's when I'm gonna touch base with the teacher and say, why don't we try these strategies for a few weeks and see if it works? If it doesn't, then we could look at me seeing him for more services. So you want to make sure you have systems in place so that people aren't just throwing kids at you, sending you emails. You actually have like a systematic referral form that one is going to hold others accountable for doing the work that they should be doing in the classroom or at home if it's a parent who's making the referral. So it kind of makes the pressure less on you because everybody is playing their part. And then once those interventions have been tried by, let's say, the teacher, and it's not working, okay, now let me look at that referral again and see what I could do to assist in the situation. So I know I just said a whole lot of different things, but it's really coming up with a system and doing a lot of prevention before you hit the intervention piece.
Right now, you mentioned the multi tiers. For those who are not in social work, but like you talking about tiers. What can you explain the multi tiers system that's in school social work?
Yes, yep. So generally people in the education system are familiar with the tiers. It looks like a triangle and some people flip it and do an upside down triangle, but let's stick with the triangle.
Almost like the Maslow's theory, but for school social work.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So at the bottom of your triangle is your tier one. So that's, think of it as like the whole school, the whole student body. So you're going to do things to address everybody, right? And then your tier two is when you get to a smaller group. So maybe you're doing an in-class intervention. Yeah, we'll use just like a classroom intervention would be a tier two. So that's like a little bit of a smaller intervention. And then tier three is that's like those more high need students who have behavioral or emotional issues, who need more of that one-on-one or very small group intervention. And that could go for social emotional, that could go for academic.
Got gotcha. And so you mentioned to partialize what you said earlier about holding, I guess, staff and maybe like the parents accountable for referrals.
Mhm.
I, I experienced like teachers, and this year, like I think the U.S. as a whole in education really didn't anticipate what happened like this year, coming out the pandemic and having all these kids coming back to school in person, and a lot of these kids spent most of 2 years being at home on a computer, like through Zoom, like we're doing right now,
Yep.
and being teaching, and or having, once they're done with school, they on an iPad or whatever they're doing, and coming to school with structure. You got to follow rules and listen and be online and all the stuff that that's related to school, and kids, like, they see a piece of paper on the desk and want to flip chairs and want to flip tables, and this is like kindergarteners doing this stuff, and it started really really young, first graders, the second graders. It was just uh, a mess for this year, and I hope schools get it together for next year. And I've seen stuff that's not off to a good start. But for kind of losing my train of thought, but basically, like, what, going back to holding accountable, I've seen teachers that, okay, somebody's interrupting class, they want them out instead of like trying to, like, figure like what's going on with the kid, or why the kid is doing such and such. And say, oh, go get the social worker, and let the social worker handle it. Go get the counselor, let the counselor handle it. And
Mhm.
I spent like hours like inside the classroom, like basically almost being like a babysitter, making sure like the kid's not doing whatever it was doing, climbing desk, climbing whatever, or trying to leave the classroom, eloping from the classroom, just being a babysitter. I'm like, I'm not a babysitter. Like I
Mhm.
like I'm trying to do some like clinical work, and I don't mind sitting in the classroom and try to help with the work and get some order in place. But almost I felt more like a babysitter slash security guard, bouncer, than an actual school
Mhm.
social worker. And this was me with limited experience. Like the teachers like, figure out, do something. I'm like, I don't even know the kid. How I'm gonna give you an intervention? Like, I don't even know what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
So
So
like what do you do in a situation like that?
I feel like I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but it really still comes down to systems. So now this system that you're talking about would come down to like the school-wide system, as far as behaviors and discipline. So this the system really should be created by the administration alongside the social worker and maybe a teacher, kind of like the leadership team collaborating. But it would be around, okay, if a student is disruptive, let's define disruptive. Let's just say, I don't know, they're roaming around the classroom, they're getting kids off task, they're not listening. Then what is the first step that the teacher is going to do? So let's say, okay, the teacher has to redirect the child 3 times before they're going to call for assistance. So they try to redirect 3 times, it doesn't work. Then they'll call. In our district, we have behavior techs. I don't know if you had that in Delaware, but it's basically a person that deals with a lot of the behaviors of the students and tries to reintegrate them back in the classroom. So maybe the behavior tech will come, pull the kid out in the hallway, touch base, send them back in the classroom. Let's say that that doesn't work. Okay, so then the next step will be, let me touch base with the social worker. Okay, social worker touch base with the kid, they come back, that's not working. All right, so we've tried all these different systems. What are we going to do next? Well, let's call the parent in and maybe let's develop a behavior plan. Let's do some observations and then the team will come back together, collaborate, and do a behavior plan. Now, the teacher is going to be responsible for implementing the behavior plan for 4 to 6 weeks. Then we'll re-meet in 4 to 6 weeks. Did these interventions work? Did they not? The teacher should be collecting data during these 4 to 6 weeks. It's a lot of work. But those systems really have to be put in place so that the social worker is just not called just because either the teacher is sick of the kid or they don't know how to handle the kid or they're just over it because they're overwhelmed and stressed, which being a teacher is a very hard job. So I get it. But it really has to be systematic with how we're handling student behavior. And that really comes from administration and it should trickle down. But it really should be like a collaborative conversation so that everybody's on the same page, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense, but like, so if you're like a brand new social worker,
Mm-hmm.
you're not a new social worker, but you're new to doing school social work, and then you see these behaviors, you see this, but the administration, for lack of a better word, is trash, and it's like what can you do? Like you're a licensed social worker, you might even be put in a situation where like in other jobs you may even like call like 911, get a kid hospitalized or something, like you work in like
Mm-hmm.
in community mental health, like all right, let's just get an evaluation and that's it, and have the kid out. Like what can a school social worker do to protect themselves from possibly a situation like, hey, like I'm licensed, or like I'm not put myself bodily harm, get myself hurt, or
Mm-hmm.
even the administration's telling me to do this, but I don't feel comfortable doing whatever they ask me to do. What can you do?
So I don't know if in all districts school social workers have like a direct supervisor. Did in your case, did you have a direct supervisor who was like a social worker who was over you? Like,
Um, as the school year went on, yes, I did.
okay. So I would say to connect with whoever your superior is as far as social work goes, to get some more insight and recommendations. I'm just going to kind of give you an example of my experience. So I did experience some of that before, where the administration wasn't really clear as far as what social workers do, and were asking me to do things that really weren't appropriate or ethical. I would reference my director, and they would guide me as far as what to say and do, but they would also speak with the principal or my principal and try to explain to them, this is why this is not appropriate, almost like a backup. If you don't have that, that could be a very difficult experience. um, if you don't have a direct supervisor or someone that could support you in the situation, um, if you are comfortable, I would encourage you to advocate for yourself and really have a conversation with the administration and really explain, hey, this is my experience, this is what I know how to do clinically, and this is how you could best use me in the school, and this is how this would help the students. Using my clinical skills in this way would help the students, but having me do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that administrator wants you to do, is not going to be helpful to the student or the school community because of this. So really trying to get them to understand what you could do clinically and how it could benefit the school and how it could be harmful, how things can be harmful if you're being asked to do things that really aren't appropriate. And that can take a lot of time. It could be conversations that you're having over and over and over again with those administrators to really
Right.
get them to understand. That is a difficult situation though. If you don't have a direct supervisor who can kind of give you backup, I would just encourage continuing to advocate for yourself and explaining to them continuously what your role entails and how they can best use you to support the school or for the benefit of the school.
Yeah, and this goes back to like I hope like a lot of these schools have learned from this past school year and have like direct and honest conversations with their staff, like what worked this year,
Yes.
what could we do better for next year, because a lot of teachers and school social workers like basically we're burnt out, and like we're just kind of like it was like The Walking Dead. It's nothing but zombies trying to make it through like the end of the school year, and like kind of like everybody kind of had their hands up, like all right, let's try to make it through the somehow some way to the end of the year, and kind of like not really. You're still putting like the effort in to make sure the kids are safe and educate them, but it didn't isn't just beyond burnt out. Did you have experience in seeing that stuff like towards the end of the school year, this past school year?
Yes. Oh yes. Especially a lot of the people that I coached, even just educators in general, were completely burnt out because the students were back in person. Most, I think, around the country, most people were back in person. There wasn't a virtual component. They had a couple of years of being on the computer, a lack of routines at home. Parents are going to work, older kids unsupervised.
Hmm.
Online, doing all these different things. So there was a lot of burnout toward the end of the year. There was a lot of retirements from educators who, probably could have did 5 more years, but they're like, this was enough. They're retiring. We had a lot of people leave to look for other social work jobs. So absolutely. But at the end of the year, I think my district did a really good job of kind of like debriefing the year. What worked, what didn't, what systems can we put in place for next year. They even had professional development this year for all the educators about having mindful classrooms, being compassionate, ways to support the students from the beginning of the year moving into next year, almost like a little bit of a prep. And it was a community mental health agency that did that professional development. It was really good. I think it was helpful, and the educators were open to it. But I think those things need to continue throughout the school year, not just like a one time thing. It needs
Right.
to be ongoing training on how to be empathetic and compassionate educators, but still holding kids to a high standard. Um, I think it's for some people who maybe are a bit more traditional in their teaching.
Hmm.
It's a different frame of thought to come from kind of that place of empathy. Because I know,
You you read my mind, because I was just about to go there, like with the teachers that have been there 20, 30 years, and like just rigid in their routines, and now you gotta implement social emotional learning, and it's like they're like, what?
and I think I hate to make generalizations, but from my experience, I think that the teachers who maybe have less than like 10 years or so in the game are a lot more open to the social emotional learning, whereas our teachers who've been in education for a longer time, this is a little bit more new to them, aren't as open. But if the social and the emotional is stable and supported, the academics are going to be so much easier. And
Hmm.
that's what I think everybody needs to understand. If we have this foundation of social, emotional, compassionate, empathy, mental health awareness, then the academic pieces are going to be a lot easier when we're addressing those needs first.
No, I totally agree with that. What are your thoughts of potentially? I don't think it's going to happen just because. teaching unions will probably fight this. But I even spoke to a teacher recently, and the teacher's like old school. He's from the military, so he's like very kind of like strict, but he relates well with the kids.
Mhm.
Of having potentially year-round school for kids to catch up, maybe for like a couple of years, just obviously you take some breaks in between, but having just kids catch up. No third. I got no third or fourth graders that reading or writing 1 or 2 years below grade level, like really no fault of their own because of the pandemic. But try to get kids to catch up to get the reading level. What do you think about that?
Um, I don't know. I I kind of struggle with that one. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I guess just from my own personal experience, I didn't grow up in a pandemic. I didn't go through a pandemic
Right.
when I was in school. But I think having those breaks in the summer is good for kids, especially if they're doing things that are, more productive, going to camp and doing those kind of more social things. But I do see the argument where, we want to continue the academic rigor and quote unquote catch them up. But it's like, well, who are we catching up to? Because we all went through a pandemic.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Who are we comparing this like catch up to? I will say that I know the inner cities were hit much harder as far as the students not moving academically as they should due to resources. Because I mean, I have friends who have children who are in like suburban schools and private schools, and during the pandemic their virtual school was like they were in college. Like it was on point. The way that they were explaining, that the teachers were engaging, the parents were involved. It just seemed like it was structured a lot better and the students got more out of it versus our students who were in the inner city who have different barriers. They may not
Mm,
have internet. They may not have a home computer, or maybe the school loaned out a computer, but somehow it's broken and now they can't get it fixed. I know
right.
we gave out little like hotspot,
Hotspots, yes.
little hotspots, yeah, but
Yeah.
they didn't always work for everybody.
Right.
I remember one of my students came back 3 different times to get a hotspot, and I don't think it was the hotspot. I think it was the building that she was in,
Hmm.
like, and the location, and having, excuse me, having access to a signal. So
Right.
because of that, she wasn't doing a whole lot of work. She couldn't go to the library. There was nowhere else to really go. So there was a lot of other barriers that our students in the inner city faced during the pandemic versus private or suburban school kids. So I say all that to say, now is it fair that we would put maybe our kids who aren't caught up, our inner city kids, in school year round? I don't know. I guess it could be beneficial. I'm sure there could be some benefits to it, but I'm feeling like kids should be able to have that break, and that's
No, I can see that. And also like, uh, so I'm like suburban, wanna be city, but suburban slash certain areas are definitely very rural. Like to
wrong.
see farms and stuff. So even like the rural kids, like they just you're on a farm, you're not really gonna get much of a internet signal,
That's
and
true.
the little Wi-Fi's was definitely not working. so so we got
That's true too.
city kids, and you got like the rural kids, like kind of all like in the same boat in terms of not getting resources that they need, and having parents like ship them to school. so,
Yeah.
so I know the parents. I know for myself, I was like definitely very anxious because COVID has hit hard, and then but at the same time it was like I was tired of fighting with my daughter a whole year on Zoom. It's like
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I think the
uh,
option is good. They did actually, now that I'm thinking, we did have an option in my district where during winter break and spring break, they had online tutoring, like
mm,
enrichment for math and reading. So parents could opt into that. and I thought that was a nice option. So if it was optional, um, I think that would be good. Having an option to be able to get like some enrichment during the summer.
Yeah, I like that idea in terms of being an option and still be online. That like you be an hour or two, and then you still got the rest of the day to do whatever you want, some fun stuff, whatever you want. I can see that being an option and not be taxing on teachers or administrative staff for trying to work during the summer and
Hmm.
especially after this long tough school year. So, what do you anticipate have possibly happening this coming school year? Do you see being a little bit better? Do you see 'em about the same, or like what do you like to see?
What I would like to see, I'll tell you what I foreshadow and what I would like to see. So what I would foreshadow is it being a bit similar to the last school year. I think at the minimum we're gonna have another. I don't want to put negative energy out there, but I
Mm,
think there will be more challenges. I think that the challenges are going to continue this school year, but I think that, or I hope that educators are just going to be more mindful and learn from some of the things that didn't work last year and implement a lot more of that social emotional support and learning this school year. What I would love to see is that it's a total 360 from last year, and we're not seeing as many of these behaviors and severe mental health issues and crises in the schools. I would love to see that come down more. But I think for those changes to happen, it's going to take a few years. And we have to be really intentional as educators to make sure we're setting that foundation and that we have mental health support in the school for the students and enough, not just one counselor or one social worker for
mm,
1,000 students. Like our schools, we need to be laced with counselors and social workers, like
no,
probably
absolutely.
5 in each, to be honest, so we could really address those mental health issues of those students. Um, I think we'll get there, but I don't think we're necessarily going to be there next year. It may take a couple years for things to get a lot better.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I looked at some job postings for the school district where I live at, and they were looking for school psychologists to work in two different schools. I'm like, you need to hire one, at least two per school, not just one doing two schools. It's like, yeah, I ain't learned anything from this year.
Exactly. And that's what contributes to the burnout, right? Being stretched too thin,
Hmm.
having different schools that you're assigned to, and then you're feeling like you're not doing really good work because you're just checking off things on a to do list. Okay, now I got to go to this school and do this assessment. And
Right.
then I got to go back to this school because this crisis happened. So it's a lot of putting out fires instead of like planting seeds.
No, I agree. And then you got just, I don't know, you got the workers who just like, okay, I check these boxes, and then like, all right, I'm burnt out. Like looking at the calendars, like, when is it Indigenous Day? When's Thanksgiving? When's
Yeah.
Christmas? And that's not a good way to really work, especially working with kids that have all these needs, and there's life stuff happening, or anything from a fire to like people still dying from COVID, and we still in a pandemic, and it's just who knows what kids went through like the last couple of years that never got addressed because everybody got a wait list for mental health services, and services are being cut, and like state, local governments keep cutting funds for services. So it's just a lot that's going on, and like you need to hire the staff, and you want to hire not only staff need to be hired, but like the buildings need to you know equip the staff that they're going to hire for. Like I need an office to work, not be like in a conference room or having my laptop and going from I need to borrow your office from this time to this time, but like I need my own space and do the work that I was hired to do.
Mhm. Yeah.
What now? Let's go back real quick to the multi tier system real quick because I even know like social workers like the school social workers that they just focus on tier two and tier three, and I know there's been a lot of emphasis on focusing on tier one, and people don't even know what what tier one involves. Like, so I know you mentioned that before, like kind of like I know for myself, like been referred kids for tier two, and their behavior is definitely like tier three. I'm like letting the school know like it's not an appropriate referral yet. I'm still got to deal with it. So, what exactly like is supposed to be a referral for tier one, a tier two, and a tier three?
Okay. So I'll start with tier three and I'll go to tier one, right? So your tier three is for every single student. So in my district, what we expect out of our school social workers is to do their tier. Um, wait, hold on. Now I'm mixing myself up. What did I say? I'm sorry. What tier one? Yes,
Let's
with
start
tier
with
one.
tier one.
Um, so we ask all of our school social workers to do their tier one interventions the first 2 months of school, and that entails either, depending on how big your school is, meeting with the students in the auditorium by grade level, or sometimes in their classroom if you have a smaller school. And during that time, you're introducing yourself to the students. You're explaining what your role is, and that's going to be, depending on the age level, how you're going to explain that, and going over several things. So the first is explaining to the children, appropriate to their grade level, what bullying is, what sexual harassment is, and how to report both of those things. What child abuse is, so they have an understanding of how they really should be treated. Aaron's law, which is a law that basically was implemented by a woman who experienced sexual abuse growing up, and she didn't really understand she was being sexually abused till she became a teenager, and she was educated on everything she was experiencing.
Mm.
So she created this policy and lobbied for this policy to be passed, that students have to be taught about what is sexually appropriate, what is sexual abuse, how to report it, and who to go to. So we have to do that with all of the students. High
I didn't
school.
even know about that one.
Mm-hmm. Aaron's law. High school students have to be, and middle school have to be taught about substance abuse and misuse,
Mm.
suicide prevention and intervention, and I'm missing one. Oh, and safe dates for our high school students, where they learn about dating violence as well as healthy relationships. So all of those things are tier one intervention. So we're laying the foundation about what's appropriate in all those different social and emotional areas.
Mm.
So the kids, one, they should know who you are because you've done these tier one interventions. And they should know who to report certain things to because you've taught them, if this happens, this is who you tell. If this happens, this is what you do.
Mm.
So your tier two are going to be those students who are having a little bit of difficulty, where you don't need to see them one on one, but they may be struggling a bit in the classroom. So that's where you would maybe create some groups. So let's say, for example, one group that I co-facilitated for a tier two intervention was Bridging Boundaries. And that was a art therapy group for students who had a parent who was incarcerated. And we had a
Mm.
large number of students who had parents who were incarcerated. Their academics may have been good, but they were off socially and emotionally because they have a parent who's incarcerated. So that was a support group for them. And we did that throughout the school year. Another example of a tier two intervention could be LGBTQ plus support group for students who maybe feel like they're not fitting in, or they just want other people to connect to who are going through some of the same experiences.
Mm.
So think of tier two as kind of like support groups, something that's open to all the students, but all the students are not going to attend. You're meeting a specific need. And then your tier three are those kids that are going to be listed on your caseload who maybe have IEPs with social emotional goals, or maybe they have 504 plans, or maybe they're just a really high need student where you have to do more individual work or very small group work, maybe 3 to 5 students on a specific skill like anger management. So that's kind of the explanation of what you would do in each of the tiers. I think I answered your question. Did I not answer your question?
Yeah,
I did. Okay.
yeah. That's the question. I, as you saying it like that, that for whatever reason really was not my experience. Is like kind of like skipped over like tier one and kind of went to like the tier two, but then like the behaviors on scene was like tier three, and I still had to like just for the most part deal with it. Eventually, it got better as the school year went on. I just knew somebody doing the same thing that they're not supposed to be doing, and it's like tier
Mhm.
three behavior, and then they want to refer me. I was like, no, it's, you're not giving me that kid. Sorry, I help out, but if something go down or whatever, but um, I'm not having me on my case, so it'll be even more stretched and burnt out that I'm already in. No, it's not happening. If I get in trouble with it,
And
whatever.
the thing about the tier one interventions is it's not like a cure all. You're really setting the foundation. So
Hmm.
not to say that you do all these tier one interventions and you're not going to have any issues.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's something that has to be consistent. You want to be consistent with those tier one interventions throughout the school year, and then the next year, and the next year. And after some time, you will start to see a difference. But I think that from the school social workers that I've talked to, those tiers aren't always presented to them in that fashion.
Hmm.
A lot of times it's because they don't have someone that's overseeing the social workers and having that kind of frame of thought, which is different than a teacher's frame of thought.
Right. Or having like supervisors who are not who are more administrative and not social workers. So it's like you're missing like the whole social work aspect that we need, and is like having stuff that or having stuff told us, so like that's not how us as a social worker like we do, but we're in your school and we kind of either we don't do it or that's needs to be ethical for us to even do it first, and kind of like we do like we kind of think about it more before we actually like do it, like okay, this is not gonna like jeopardize my license, this is ethical, like okay, it's I really shouldn't be doing it, but it's like okay, they asked me to do it, and you kind of putting yourself in a situation. So it's um I'm glad I got the experience that like I know like okay, this is definitely like not for me, and I'm glad. And I've talked to school social workers who love it, and like the kids were cute, like I like call me Mr. Bass, and like dancing with them and doing those type of stuff, supporting them with basketball games and things like that. But uh I'm retired. I like that start that 5-star player that does 1 year in college and they go to the pros. So I did my time.
Yep.
So what's next for you? What you got going on as this recording? We're in the middle of July. So
What's
what else you
next?
got going on for the rest of the year
Well,
besides the upcoming school year? It's too
well,
early to talk about back to school stuff yet, even though I saw Walmart the other day already got the sales popping.
already I'm like, it's too early. Stop. I mean, honestly, for me, just the rest of the summer is really focused on like, self care, preparing well, I don't want to say preparing, I'll say grounding myself and just kind of de stressing to get ready for a upcoming busy school year. Um, I definitely want to attend the National School Social Work Association conference next year. I didn't get to do it this year, but that is on the to do list for sure, to meet other school social workers, network, learn from other people. So definitely that. And just getting the word about the School Social Work Solutions Planner out, so I could support more individuals. But that's really what I have going on.
What do you do in terms of self care? Like we use it as a buzzword, and for myself, coming, or try to do a whole startup business about it. It's not just a hashtag; it's a way of life. But what does self care look like for you?
For me, it's really just being intentional about how I spend my time as far as physically, emotionally, spiritually, even professionally. So it really depends on the day. Like self care for me looks different every day. For the last couple of days, it's looked like going to the gym and cooking at home, making meals, and not like buying quick processed stuff. So we're
Mhm.
putting, nutritious meals in our body. This morning, I took 30 minutes to just read because I'm always scrolling on my phone and I'm like, this is really not healthy. And I'm looking at a bunch of stuff I already seen yesterday. So let me open this book.
Or 1,001 people doing the same dance.
Thing. I was on TikTok and I'm like, why does everybody's morning routine look the same? They get out their bed, they open their blinds, they throw their workout clothes on the bed. And I'm not hating. I'm just saying, I'm like, this is all starting to look the same. So let me put my phone down and read. So there was a book I started that I have not finished, the Boundaries book by Nedra Twab. So I read a chapter out of that. So like that's gonna count as self care today. As for my physical self care, I have like a mani and pedi today. So it's really just being intentional about my time and how I'm pouring back into myself on a daily basis. And it kind of looks different every day, but just
Mhm.
making sure I commit a minimum of 30 minutes to pouring back into myself, however it looks on that specific day. It could look like journaling, it could look like reading, it could look like taking a walk, but just something for myself.
No, that's great. And, it's so important. Even mention physical health, going to the doctor, especially
Yes.
for us people of color, especially us men. Like I actually got a doctor's appointment today, so I'm like get ready for that. So,
Yep.
it's important to especially after we do stressful jobs, and we're not only in it for outcome, in it for income too, and we gotta take care of ourselves because if we don't take care of ourselves, nobody is
Mhm.
really going to take care of us. Even we may have like the most supportive family and friends, but we gotta take care of our own individual selves. Um, with that being said, how could people find you?
You guys can find me on Instagram at School Social Work Solutions, also on TikTok at School Social Work Solution, no S on TikTok. And then my website is www.schoolswsolutions.com.
Awesome. This was great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.